The prehistory of Siberia is marked by several archaeologically distinct cultures. In the Chalcolithic, the cultures of western and southern Siberia were pastoralists, while the eastern taiga and the tundra were dominated by hunter-gatherers until the late Middle Ages and even beyond. Substantial changes in society, economics and art indicate the development of nomadism in the Central Asian steppes in the first millennium BC. History of research. Scholarly research of the archaeological background of the region between the Urals and the Pacific began in the reign of Peter the Great, who ordered the collection of Scythian gold hoards and thereby rescued the contents of several robbed graves before they were melted down. During his reign, several expeditions were charged with the scientific, anthropological and linguistic research of Siberia, including the Second Kamchatka expedition of the Dane Vitus Bering. Scholars also took an interest in archaeology and carried out the first archaeological excavations of Siberian kurgans. After a temporary reduction of interest in the first half of the 19th century, archaeological research in Siberia reached new heights in the late 19th century. Excavations were particularly intense in South Siberia and Central Asia. The results of the October Revolution 1917 created different, often restricted, conditions for archaeological research, but led to even larger projects, especially rescue excavations as a result of gigantic building projects. Eventually, even remote areas of the Soviet Union such as Sakha and Chukotka were archaeologically explored. After the Second World War, these developments continued. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, much more intensive collaboration with the West became possible. Topography. The natural situation of Siberia is characterized by a great deal of variety in climate, vegetation, and landscape. In the west, Siberia is bordered by the Ural Mountains. Further, the West Siberian lowlands extend to the east all the way to the river Yenisei. Beyond this are the central Siberian highlands which are bordered on the east by the basin of the Lena River. Beyond that are the northeast Siberian highlands. Siberia is bordered on the south by a rough chain of mountains and to the southwest by the hills of the Kazakh border. The climate in Siberia is very variable. Yakutia, northeast of the Lena, is among the coldest places on Earth, but every year it also reaches temperatures of more than 50 degrees Celsius. The rainfall is very low. This is true of the southwest as well, where steppes, deserts and semi-deserts border on one another. Agriculture is only possible in Siberia without artificial irrigation today between 50 degrees and 60 degrees north. The climatic situation is responsible for the different biomes of the region. In the northernmost section, there is tundra with minimal vegetation. The largest part of Siberia, aside from the mountainous regions, is taiga, northern coniferous forests. In the southwest this becomes forested steppe, and even further south it transitions to grass steppes and the Central Asian desert. Before the beginning of the Holocene about 12,000 years ago, the situation was different. During the Vaiksalian glaciation, the tundra extended much further south and an ice sheet covered the Urals and the area to the east of the Lower Yenisei. Historical overview. Neolithic finds from the Lower Paleolithic appear to be attested between East Kazakhstan and Altai. The burial of a Neanderthal child found in 1938 shows similarities with the Mousterian of Iraq and Iran. In the Upper Paleolithic, by contrast, most remains are found in the Urals, where, among other things, rock carvings depicting mammoths are found. In Altai, on the Upper Yenisei, west of Lake Baikal and around 25,000 on the shore of the Laptev Sea, north of the Arctic Circle, the remains of huts have been found in the settlement of Malta near Irkutsk. Sculptures of animals and women recall the European Upper Paleolithic. The Siberian Paleolithic continues well into the European Mesolithic. In the post-glacial period, the taiga developed. Microliths, which are common elsewhere, have not been found. In North Asia, the Neolithic is mostly a chronological term, since there is no evidence for agriculture or even pastoralism in Siberia during the Central European Neolithic. However, the Neolithic cultures of North Asia are distinguished from the preceding Mesolithic cultures and far more visible as a result of the introduction of pottery. Southwest Siberia reached a Neolithic cultural level during the Chalcolithic, which began here towards the end of the 4th millennium BC, which roughly coincided with the introduction of copper working. In the northern and eastern regions, there is no detectable change. Bronze Age. In the second half of the 3rd millennium BC, bronze working reached the cultures of western Siberia. Chalcolithic groups in the eastern Ural foothills developed the so-called Andronovo culture, which took various local forms. The settlements of Archim, Olgino and Sintashta are particularly notable as the earliest evidence for urbanization in Siberia. In the valleys of the Obernertisch, the same ceramic cultures attested that during the Neolithic continue. The changes in the Baikal region and Yakutia were very slight. In the Middle Bronze Age, the West Siberian Andronovo culture expanded markedly to the east and even reached the Yenisei Valley. In all the local forms of the Andronovo culture, homogeneous ceramics are found, which also extended to the cultures on the Ob. Here, however, unique Neolithic ceramic traditions were maintained as well. With the beginning of the Late Bronze Age, crucial cultural developments took place in southern Siberia. The Andronovo culture dissolved. Its southern successors produced an entirely new form of pottery, with bulbous ornamental elements. At the same time, the southern cultures also developed new forms of bronze working, probably as a result of influence from the southeast. These changes were especially significant in the Baikal region. The Chalcolithic material culture, which had continued up to this time, was replaced by a bronze-working pastoralist culture. There and in Yakutia, bronze was only used as a material for the first time at this point. Iron Age. The cultural continuity on the Ob continued in the 1st millennium BC. As the Iron Age began in Siberia, the local ceramic style continues there even in this period. A much larger break occurred in the Central Asian steppe. The sedentary, predominantly pastoralist society of the Late Bronze Age is replaced by the mobile horse nomads, which would continue to dominate this region until modern times. The mobility, which the new cultural form enabled, unleashed a powerful dynamic, since henceforth the people of Central Asia were able to move across the steppe in great numbers. The neighboring sedentary cultures were not unaffected by this development. Ancient China was threatened by the Xiongnu and the neighbors. The ancient states of modern Iran were opposed by the Massagetæ and Sakas, and the Roman Empire eventually was confronted by the Huns. The social changes are clearly indicated in the archaeological finds. Settlements are no longer found. Members of the new elite were buried in richly furnished kurgans, and completely new forms of art developed. In the damper steppes to the north, the sedentary pastoralist culture of the Late Bronze Age developed under the influence of the material culture of the nomads. Proto-urban settlements like Shitsha formed the late Urmin culture in West Siberia, and the settlements in the north of the Xiongnu cultural area. Subsequent period. In many places the transition to later periods remains problematic due to the lack of archaeological evidence. Nevertheless, some generalizations are possible. In the Central Asian steppes, Turkic groups become detectable sometime in the 5th century. Over the following centuries, they expand to the north and west until eventually they brought brought the whole of southern Siberia under the control. The area further north, where the speakers of Uralic and Paleo-Siberian languages were located, is still poorly known. The next clear break in the history of Siberia is the Russian expansion into the east, which began in the 16th century and only concluded in the 19th century. This process marks the beginning of modernity in Siberia peoples and languages. Reliable historical evidence for the area first appears at the beginning of the first millennium BC, with sources from the Near East. Greek and Chinese sources are also available from slightly later. Thus, certain statements about the peoples and languages of the region are only possible from the Iron Age. For earlier times and the northern part of Siberia, only archaeological evidence is available. Some theories, like the Kurgan hypothesis of Maria Gimbutas, attempt to relate hypothetical language families to archaeological cultures, but this is a highly uncertain procedure. Sure statements are possible only since the first millennium BC, when neighboring literate cultures came into contact with the people of the steppe. In the steppes north of the Black Sea and east of the Caspian Sea, Greek, Assyrian and Persian sources attest to horse nomads, which can be identified as speakers of Iranian languages. The first reports from ancient China of the nomads north of China date from the same period, along with various unidentified groups from Shang and Zhou dynasty texts. The Xiongnu are worthy of mention, based on personal names and titles transmitted by the Chinese sources. Different scholars have attempted to identify the language of the Xiongnu as an early Turkic language, a Proto-Mongolic language, or a Yeniseian language. At the beginning of the early Middle Ages, the Iranian peoples disappeared, and in the place Turkic peoples expanded across the region between the eastern edge of Europe and northeastern Siberia. In the areas to the north of the Asiatic steppes, speakers of Uralic and Paleo-Siberian languages are suspected to have been settled in the Middle Ages. Turkic peoples appear here as well, but the prehistoric extent is not clear.